Welcome to the News Network. My name is Coriel Kwachi, and today we will be discussing how the 2024 presidential election is shaping up to be a pivotal moment for the future of education in the United States. Donald Trump's campaign has introduced Project 2025, a comprehensive policy agenda that could drastically reshape the Department of Education, especially for college students. Project 2025 also includes proposals that could reshape critical education funding programs, including Title I, a federal initiative designed to support schools with high numbers of low-income students. While Title I primarily affects K-12 education, its changes could ripple into higher education. Students from disadvantaged backgrounds who often benefit from Title I funding in earlier schooling might face greater barriers in preparing for and accessing college. Additionally, proposed cuts to federal education funding under Project 2025 could limit support for programs like TRIO and Gear Up, which specifically help first-generation and low-income students transition to higher education. These programs provide academic support, counseling, and financial literacy resources that many students depend on to navigate the college application process and succeed once they're enrolled. For students relying on need-based aid, the shrinking role of federal oversight could mean fewer protections against rising tuition costs and less access to resources aimed at reducing economic disparities in higher education. Critics warn that the combination of reduced federal funding and increased state control may create inconsistencies in how students across the country access college opportunities. First, I will be talking with Dr. Aisha Powell, Assistant Professor in the Department of Strategic Communications in the School of Global Journalism and Communication at Morgan State University.
I think it will be detrimental to not only public schools but institutions of higher learning because the Department of Education oversees so much, like IUPs for students who take special education classes, making sure there's accessibility in each school, whether that be elevators, escalators, ramps, and then also funding for lower income students to go to college, specifically Pell Grants that most HBCU students take. So overall, the less fortunate students will be impacted the most, and they'll have less access to education, which they're already suffering from lack of access. Well, I think currently right now, FAFSA and the Department of Education is doing the best they can, but they're not super efficient, and they just lack the robust workforce to kind of efficiently process things. For example, students who got public loan forgiveness still are paying for it and didn't go through, or there's just a bunch of processing issues. The Department of Treasury absolutely doesn't have the capacity to take on such a huge workload, so it's going to be detrimental to workers in the Department of Treasury. And they're going to be even more efficient because now they're kind of focusing on, they're doing two roles instead of one, and there's no mandate or implementation to increase the Department of Treasury's workforce. So people are going to be burdened, they're going to quit, it's not going to be better. I think a better option would be to improve the Department of Education, which Trump has no plans of doing because he doesn't care about education. This is so contentious right now because people are uneducated, and DEI efforts not only impact or benefit minorities, but it also helps to benefit white men and white women. And so we already see with the Asian American students who sued, I believe it's Harvard, for to repeal the affirmative action, Asian American students blamed in some ways other minority students, specifically Black students, for the reason why they weren't getting into these institutions of higher learning. but their numbers have not gone up. And so when we take back DEI, of course it benefits Black students, but it benefits everyone. So there's not going to be too much change, I think, in the racial demographics of schools, because there's just so much other efforts that are built into diversifying the school force. However, it's nice to have a policy that tries to get marginalized groups within the door, but African American students, we've been through worse historically. So it's nothing we can't overcome or we can't champion in the end. So yes, and again, there's still so much, even with Title I and Title IX, there's still so much discrimination and disparities within different school districts. But it's a provision that is pushing efforts to make sure everyone has a quality education. Taking that away will make the disparities even more disparaging. And again, students who are underserving in high needs area will have to face the brunt of it with getting funding pulled from their schools. This is an attack on arts, humanities, music. Those are usually the first things to be cut. And additionally, special education. Students will kind of be left to fend for themselves. Schools are not equipped to understand the needs of special disorders or physical disabilities. And so the digital divide, the educational gap is just going to become wider. And we already see what that is doing now. So to think of it becoming worse is pretty terrifying. So this is particularly difficult because I'm at a HBCU, and the basis of a HBCU education is teaching American history, which is African American history, the efforts that enslaved Africans put into building every facet of society, as well as critical thinking, which is deemed woke, DEI, anti-critical race theory. But we can't teach lies. So it's about subverting whatever is coming down the pipeline from the new administration and still teaching factual history. Unfortunately, certain classes like Black diaspora, African American history, even women gender studies will probably be cut. But that just means that if someone's taking an American history class, they need to learn about African American history and how Black people put work into the society. So name changes, but the facts will never change. So this is really awful because there's been so much efforts to actually allow people to identify how they want to identify outside of the binary spectrum, and to walk it back is a disservice to everyone. There's never been a time in history where there weren't trans people, where there weren't non-binary people. We just now have a name, and people can choose their pronouns, how they want to be identified, and that's amazing. And to think that's going to be back is going to be difficult because it's already, we're so used to, or some of us are used to, this more inclusive environment, and it's just going to be sad to see it go back. But a lot of Black people, older Black people specifically and religious, have never accepted non-binary, trans, or queer people, and they kind of perpetuate harmful rhetoric. So I think specifically within the Black community at HBCU, some people are going to be happy that they don't have to be inclusive, which is unfortunate, but I'm going to respect however anyone wants to identify. So one important thing to remember is that Morgan State was here before they got federal funding, and they'll be here even if they remove it. So we have existed outside of getting money and support for the government when there is segregation, Jim Crow, racism, slavery. And so we'll persist on, but I think the demographics of the school will change, and that's what Morgan has to address. specifically first generation students, will strongly decline because they probably do not have enough money to come to school. They might not be taught in high school that college is an option. And so we have to kind of steer our efforts towards how to protect first generation students and kind of foster some way or pipeline to get them through the door. Morgan has had record high enrollments for the past couple of years, which is great, but we have to kind of fill in the gaps within the local community and other schools in terms of physically going to let students know college is an option and Morgan can support them in whatever ways we can. Well, probably 80% of my students are on financial aid. I think over 70% of HBCU students receive a Pell Grant. And so I try to support students by giving them alternative scholarships, having them thinking about ways they can fund their education. Obviously, I cannot help pay for everyone's tuition, but it's important, or I find that it's been important to let my current students know now they have to pivot potentially, offer them resources, do research, looking up things to send to them, that's important, and then have them tell their younger siblings or the younger generation upcoming that they have to think of different ways to be able to afford college outside of federal funding. So this is hard because here at Morgan State and in general, HBCUs pride themselves on being politically correct, similar to the Democratic Party. So they steer away from controversial statements, from getting people upset, kind of, staying within their realm so they could be on the good side. But unfortunately, we need to call it out as we see it, whether it be litigation, calling on our alumni also, because they have money, they also have voices, they're in high-ranking titles, some of them, and to litigiously take our government to court, sue, lawsuits, whatever we can do, civic engagement. It's not the time where we have to be like, okay, let's bootstrap, let's figure out a way to persevere through this hardship and be diplomatic. No, we need to riot, we need to flip tables, we need to be in court, we need to be yelling, protesting, civil disobedience, whatever we can do to make sure our voices are heard and to pressure our government, legislators to fight for our rights.
Do you ever think that Morgan would take that approach, or do you think they would be more silent or neutral towards the situation?
I think Morgan has tended to be more silent on certain terms and times because there's this ideology that you want to be on the good side of white people so that they can accept you, not be disruptive, not be a ratchet black person, being politically correct so that you can kind of pass by. But that's not what our ancestors did. That's not what history tells us to make a change. And so it's up to President Wilson to see how he can disrupt this, but they're probably going to be diplomatic, unfortunately. But you never know. They might turn up, and that would be great.
So if you were in his position, like as the president of Morgan State, how would you take the approach?
First, I would put out a statement disavowing Project 2025, like now. And then also going to the mayor, the governor, and pressuring them to say what are they going to do in advance of what's going to happen. Going to town halls, meetings, kind of putting pressure on Maryland State to react similar to what California is doing. Governor Newsom is passing policies to protect women's rights to abortions, the ability to get gender-affirming surgery. He's putting stuff into place right now. So as the HBCU, I would be putting pressure on the mayor and seeing what we can get them to do.
My name is Angela Hayward. I'm an administrative assistant here at Morgan State University for the School of Global Journalism and Communications, Strategic Communication. I'm also a graduating senior fall 2024. I believe my first thoughts about that, it's actually sad, and it's corrupting, and it's dreadful just to see someone come in and just dismantle such hardworking progress to the educational system. And this will definitely affect college students that are not part of private universities, but public universities such as Morgan State, Towson universities, and definitely other states just within Maryland and beyond. It definitely impacted a lot. Possibly, 4 years in college could probably end up being more, maybe 6 years, just because of the effect that it's going to take a toll with the university. There's going to be a lot of changes, and it's basically a slippery slope, in my opinion, on what may transpire with this Project 2025. I truly think it's going to be a big loss, especially when you have a lot of, for example, at Morgan, you have a lot of international students all over the world. Like, we have a ton of countries where students come from to not only help the school, but just the U.S. itself. So with that big hit, that big loss, it's really going to have a big impact, just not only for international students, but just students in general. Definitely, without a doubt. I mean, again, you have a lot of students that are trying to go to college to better themselves. A lot of Americans come from backgrounds where it's just middle class families to single parents. So for them to remove that would be a huge disappointment and a huge loss. So as for that, it'll be, once again, this topic is very disappointing. It's, again, going to hurt a lot of colleges, public colleges, that rely on funds just to keep the universities alive and, hope alive for the students. And again, this impact is a slippery slope. And when we don't have the students, we're not going to have the use of administrative assistants or anybody else, the registration department, admissions. A lot of this stuff is going to be a domino effect as far as the faculty and staff side. As far as the student side, definitely, again, it's very trouble just to hear that this will happen. And again, it's almost like a circle. It's like, without the students, you don't have a job. And without the job, the students don't have no education. So it is a very big impact to our social society, our educational society, and especially us as African Americans. As we know, it's not easy being raised in middle class or, again, single family. And not just us, people of color, people coming over from different countries. So it's a big circle effect if that were to happen. So basically, if that were to happen, and speaking as a proud Black gay woman, honestly, it would be a shame. It'd be a shame and a disgrace. And once again, you're going to have a lot of students who may not want to go to college, especially if they're different. They may feel some type of way, discriminated against. And basically, you'll be creating a war of some sort, if you can't even say the word gay, or transsexual, because this is 2024, it's not 1964.
And finally, I will be interviewing Simone Gaskins, senior elementary education major at Morgan State University.
I hate it. I don't like it. Because the education department, they've been getting better throughout the years. I'm not going to say that they've been declining, but they've been getting better with helping kids with their reading, because that's one thing that the kids really need to know now is how to read. Oh my gosh. Helping kids with their reading, writing, spelling in a sense, and some sort of math, but they should keep doing what they're doing, but just break it down enough to where you can bring in new things, but it doesn't take a big hit to children, because as a future teacher, I have to figure out, like, leave everything in the past that has been done for the past years to me getting to school, and then bring in what they're doing, but still rely on the foundation. And I think they're trying to just dismantle the whole foundation and create a new one. But that foundation was set in place for a reason, so we can get to where we are now. So they shouldn't really be touching that foundation. And now that they've touched it, who knows what the education department is going to look like within the next 10 years. Well, not even 10, within the next 4 to 5. It's very, very, very important, because living in the city of Baltimore, not a lot of early education programs get as much funding as they need. Like a few schools that the education department does for like our internships and stuff, half of the schools have funding while the other schools are trying to catch up on their funding. And you can just see how far the children are getting with the funding that they do have versus what the kids don't have. And the teachers that don't have it are really doing everything in their power now to act as if they have it already versus not having it at all. I feel like the federal government should not give all their money, but at least give a decent amount to where you know that they'll be good within the next couple of years, and not just brush past them every time something within the education department happens. I definitely will be prepared, because without the books involved, a lot of kids in this day, in this modern age, they know a lot already prior to us even getting to the book. Once I am able to get to that topic in the classroom, I'm going to not tell my students the whole entire truth of it, but not sugarcoat it, but keep it into a professional and teacher way, to where they know this is something serious. This is something that we can talk about, but don't use it as a joke or an insult or a way to harm others, whether that be physically or socially or mentally.
One of the key areas this initiative intersects with is the First Amendment, particularly in how it could affect the freedoms of speech and expression on college campuses. The First Amendment guarantees the right to free speech, but debates over what constitutes free and protected speech in education have intensified in recent years. Under Project 2025's focus on patriotic education, colleges and universities could face pressure to revise curricula in ways that prioritize certain narratives over others. Critics argue this might stifle academic freedom and restrict open dialogue, which are essential for higher learning. This concern brings to mind landmark First Amendment cases such as Tinker v. Des Moines, where the Supreme Court ruled that students do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. If federal policies or state-led mandates compel universities to adopt specific ideological frameworks, it could raise serious ethical questions about the government overreach and viewpoint discrimination. Ethical considerations extend to the transparency and inclusivity of policymaking. Critics of Project 2025 argue that the voices of marginalized communities, who are often most affected by education policies, are not adequately represented in these plans. Ensuring equity requires engaging diverse perspectives and upholding ethical standards in decision-making. As we face changes in education policy, it's important to remember that the First Amendment protects academic freedom and open discussion. Whether or not Project 2025 aligns with these values will depend on how its policies are implemented and whether they uphold the rights and ethics of our educational system. Thank you for joining us in this discussion. Stay informed, stay engaged, and remember, the future of education affects us all. We'll see you next time.